The latest AZ-400 exam dumps are new updated for your designing and implementing Microsoft DevOps Solutions exam and can help you get Microsoft certified. DevOps Engineer Expert Certification. Passcert team new updated AZ-400 questions and answers for you to practice so that you can feel confident to take your Microsoft AZ-400 exam. Question 1. You have a project in Azure DevOps. You plan to deploy a self-hosted agent by using an unattended configuration script. Which two values should you define in the configuration script? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. Authorization credentials. B. The project name. C. The deployment group name. D. The organization URL. E. The agent pool name. Answer: A, D. Question 2. You have Azure Pipelines and GitHub integrated as a source code repository. The build pipeline has continuous integration enabled. You plan to trigger an automated build whenever code changes are committed to the repository. You need to ensure that the system will wait until a build completes before queuing another build. What should you implement? A. Path filters. B. Batch changes. C. Scheduled builds. D. Branch filters. Answer: B. Question 3. What should you use to implement the code quality restriction on the release pipeline for the investment planning application suite? A. A trigger. B. A pre-deployment approval. C. A post-deployment approval. D. A deployment gate. Answer: D. Question 4. Which branching strategy should you recommend for the investment planning application suite? A. Release isolation. B. Main only. C. Development isolation. D. Feature isolation. Answer: C. Question 5. In Azure DevOps, you create Project 3. You need to meet the requirements of the project. What should you do first? A. From Azure DevOps, create a service endpoint. B. From SonarQube, obtain an authentication token. C. From Azure DevOps, modify the build definition. D. From SonarQube, create a project. Answer: A. Question 6. You need to implement Project 4. What should you do first? A. Add the from instruction in the Dockerfile file. B. Add a copy and publish build artifacts task to the build pipeline. C. Add a Docker task to the build pipeline. D. Add the maintainer instruction in the Dockerfile file. Answer: C. Question 7. You add the virtual machines as managed nodes in Azure Automation State Configuration. You need to configure the computer in Group 7. What should you do? A. Run the register Azure Automation Disk Node Azure PowerShell cmdlet. B. Modify the configuration mode property of the Local Configuration Manager, LCM. C. Install PowerShell Core. D. Modify the refresh mode property of the Local Configuration Manager, LCM. Answer: A. Question 8. You need to configure Azure pipelines to control App2 builds. Which authentication method should you use? A. Windows NTLM. B. Certificate. C. SAML. D. Personal Access Token, PAT. Answer: D. Question 9. You need to meet the technical requirements for controlling access to Azure DevOps. What should you use? A. Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, MFA. B. On-premises firewall rules. C. Conditional access policies in Azure AD. D. Azure Role-Based Access Control, Azure RBAC. Answer: C. Question 10. Your company is concerned that when developers introduce open-source libraries, it creates licensing compliance issues. You need to add an automated process to the build pipeline to detect when common open-source libraries are added to the codebase. What should you use? A. Microsoft Visual Source Safe. B. PDM. C. White Source. D. OWASP Zap. Answer: C.